Chris and Suzanne Styles on Mix 93.8.
Well, isn't it lovely to be back in studio with you tonight and to know that we are on DSTV channel 923. You go away for 2 weeks and just look what happens.
Yeah, and congratulations on that. I mean, what a scoop. And now there's a much bigger audience, and it's actually fantastic to see how Mix FM's listenership is just growing, and the Rams numbers are going up. And I know I'm talking radio speak now, but the thing that I'm saying is that the radio station isn't growing. In fact, it's exploding. And that is just lovely to see.
And also thanks to you, the listeners, for supporting us so well. So these are the reasons why we're able to get these opportunities. So it's fantastic. So you're with Chris and Suzanne Styles on The Success Show on Mix 93.8 FM, and you can send us a tweet on @Mix938FM or an SMS tonight on 41348. Very interesting topic and a lovely couple in studio with us tonight.
Absolutely. As always, we're talking about success, and therefore the couple that we have in studio with us tonight will share some of their successes. They will share how they built a very successful businesses, but at the same time, they'll also share a little bit of the good, the bad, and the ugly, if I can call it that. Because there are always those parts of a business where you struggled, where something didn't work out the way you expected it. And that is what is important about the Success Show, is that we tell it all and we tell it true, warts and all. And the thing is, in that lies inspiration for other people who in that moment might be struggling in a part of their business or with an aspect of their business. And as a result of the story that our studio guests tell or that we teach in the way of a success lesson, you have an aha moment which keeps you going. Now, as always, as customary at the beginning of the show, we dig into Harv Ekker's deck of secrets of the millionaire mind. And the card that I drew tonight is a stunning card. It says, embrace responsibility. And the message on the back of the card says, most people run from responsibility. That's why they are broke. Rich people are willing to take on big responsibilities, and that's why they're rich. And how true is that? And the two people we have in studio tonight have certainly taken on big responsibilities in that they have 17 outlets of their business around the country. It's a big business.
That's for sure. Now, considering that it's Global Entrepreneur Week and South Africa has the Thud Fest up at Constitutional Hill this week, and there are activities daily. Chris and I spent the day today coaching and teaching a really, really fabulous group of young entrepreneurs. And if you haven't been down there, I suggest you go down there as the week progresses. There's some really exciting stuff going on down there, and especially for young entrepreneurs, but that doesn't preclude anybody. Go on down and listen to the experts. Join in with the international telecasts and webinars. I know that they connected today with groups from London, entrepreneurs as young as 8, making 3 and 4 figure amounts from their little entrepreneur businesses online. So I tell you, that's showing that the young entrepreneurs in the UK are getting with the program. So today, my card is work on you. You are the root of your financial success or failure. If you work on the roots, the fruits will just take care of themselves. And I just love that. That's just brilliant.
Yeah, so do I, because at the end of the day, the fruits that you're seeing, the visible results, really all stem from exactly what is going on in your mind, because thoughts become things, lest we forget.
That's for sure. Now, in studio with us today is a very, very dynamic couple. I'm going to be introducing Dr. Maureen Allem, and she's a medical doctor, but with a special interest in aesthetic and integrative anti-aging medicine and procedures, something very close to the heart of most women that I know on the planet. And I think a couple of men these days even are getting in touch with their, what do they call it, their metrosexual side of looking after themselves, which I think is a great thing. Now, Dr. Maureen frequently travels all over the world, attending world anti-aging congresses and laser forums to stay abreast of the most up-to-date non-invasive procedures. Now, I love that kind of thing, because we've all seen what happens when women go under the knife for one too many times, especially if you watch any of the gossip channels on TV. You've seen a couple of mistakes, I'm sure. In the early days, Dr. Allem qualified as a medical doctor in 1987, and following a 10-year career in the conventional medical profession, running a medical ward in a provincial hospital. She moved into the executive health field and spent 7 years doing annual medicals and lifestyle assessments for top executives nationally. I'm sure you met a couple of guys that might need some non-invasive procedures there. And then early during 2001, Dr. Maureen became increasingly interested in non-surgical aesthetics and the use of non-invasive treatments to rejuvenate the face and body, and start an aesthetic practice doing Botox and fillers for patients. Now, I'm not going to go into it anymore because we're going to need to ask Dr. or Maureen? Maureen, right. So we're going to ask Maureen more questions on how she started out and things like that just now. And I'm going to leave Chris to introduce her other half.
Absolutely, and I met him before the show, and goodness gracious, this guy's got a lot of energy coming off him, my word. Victor Snyders, he the CEO of the business, and I love in his bio the fact that he joined the company with the vision and the mission to grow the company to be the best in its category. Now, I love that use of word, the best in its category. That shows the passion, it shows the dedication, it shows the focus on quality. And Victor, Maureen, welcome to the Success Show on Mix 93.8 FM.
Thank you very much, Chris, Suzanne.
Yeah, we're certainly looking forward to a very entertaining hour, and it's lovely to interview a couple. Usually we have the one half or the better half. Oh gosh, I've got to really watch my words there. But to have a couple and to know that you work in the business together, you're with each other all day, every day. And of course, that in itself can bring its own set of unique challenges. So it'd be lovely for us to also understand how you two work so well together. But before we go down that road, Maureen, it says here in the briefing that I received that you had an absolute passion for what it is that you do now, and a real love or a desire to explore it. How on earth did what you were doing back then translate into what you are doing now? What was the change and what was the journey?
Look, I worked for 10 years in the provincial hospital, and eventually after 10 years I got tired of seeing really sick people. And I needed a change, and my son was matriculating and needing to go to university, so I decided to move up to Johannesburg. I was in Klerksdorp, working at both hospitals in Klerksdorp. So I made my trek up to Johannesburg, and I started off doing locums, and then slowly, because of the whole Botox had just started being, people becoming aware of Botox at that stage. And for many years, my daughter, Catherine, who's now 31, but from the age of 3, she was frowning. And I kept saying, Catherine, stop frowning. Because she looked very angry. And eventually I started putting sellotape on her forehead. And obviously that didn't work. And I realized, that people can't actually help frowning. And by frowning, you create a different impression. People get a different impression of you. So when I heard about Botox in 1999, I was quite amazed. And but I couldn't find many doctors who were doing it at that stage. Only a few plastic surgeons were doing Botox at that stage. And eventually, in about the year 2000, I went with 3 of my sisters. I have 6, and they all frowned very badly. And the 4 of us went to a plastic surgeon, and obviously, being a doctor, sat there, stood by and held their hand. And I watched him do the Botox, and it was quite amazing how the Botox changed our faces. And then I tried to look for this Botox, and I took my MIMS out. That's what the doctor's Bible for all the medication. And there was no Botox in the MIMS. So I was confused as to where to find this Botox. And about a few months later, I was reading through a dermatology journal, and there, lo and behold, was a huge advert for Botox. So I phoned the people up, and they came and they trained me, and I practiced on all my sisters and all friends. I'll never forget the second person I did Botox around the eyes. I gave her the biggest bruise. So I've always been very cautious around the eyes, because if you hit the wrong, if you hit a vein or artery, can cause, can give a serious black eye. Yeah. So that's how it all started. And then obviously my daughter just turned 18, so she also got a tiny bit of Botox, and that changed her expression. And that's how it all started. So it started off with Botox. So at that stage, I was doing the medicals in the morning at a company in Sunninghill, and in the afternoon I used to see people at home. And then the Botox practice slowly grew. And eventually 3-4 years later, so after a few months, Botox eventually became fillers, because Botox can only do a certain, Botox normally does the upper half of the face, and you need to also address the lower half of the face. And then I started doing fillers. And at that stage, there was no training for fillers. So the distributor dropped off the fillers, and he saw my 2 patients, and he said, "Good luck to you." And the very first 2 patients, they had, very bad smokers' lines. And I took 1 hour doing these smokers' lines per patient. I mean, I laugh at it now. And that's how, I basically had to teach myself and watch a few videos, obviously, before I did any procedures. And then down the line, I eventually became the trainer for the local company that brought in Botox and fillers. And then after a while, I realized, that it was getting too busy at home, and I had to move. And I wanted to do lasers at that stage. And, being in I live in a townhouse complex, and you can't really have too many people coming at the front door. They were actually getting upset by all these people, coming into the complex. So I had to move. So I had to find premises. And, it's just grown slowly from there.
Now, I've got to ask, how are you going to get or how do you get your husband, who's an architect, works on huge commercial development, shopping centres, retail, and he's going to come and work for someone that does Botox and fillers?
To get him to do the Botox and fillers was another story. We had to anesthetize him for 3 hours before we actually did the first treatment. But he was amazed by this whole,
and a
process.
bottle of Merlot.
I can imagine. I'm actually sitting here thinking, oh my goodness, don't look at my face. What do I need?
But now, believe it or not, he actually asks me for Botox. When he realizes his Botox is worn off and he needs to, look
see,
fresh.
This is why
He's the one that asks me for Botox.
Well,
now.
you're a lifesaver, because the number of people that have said to me that when I'm deep in thought, I have a thunderous face. And it's like, goodness gracious, when you frown, it looks like doomsday coming at us. And I look at them in absolute astonishment, because I'm just inside of my head. Are you with me? I'm loving it. I'm having a great time with an idea, but they think that, here comes the local chain axe murderer. I mean, it's crazy. Well, there you go. So Botox, hallelujah. That looks
and fillers. I think I've got something for my frown line. Now, Victor, before we ask Maureen to tell us how she got you in there, what was the move worthwhile when you moved? Was it something that made you nervous at the thought of coming into the business? Or was it something that you just thought, this is a great idea?
I don't think it was actually either of those. It was a challenge. And I got to a point in my own life where I just wanted a challenge. By way of background, both Maureen and I were married for 21 years first time around, and we were both separated, and we'd both become empty nesters. My children had grown up and moved away. Maureen's children had grown up and moved away, and we met in 2004. And I was doing what I did in the shopping centre industry, and Maureen was doing what she did. She worked at the clinic during the morning. She saw some patients in the afternoon. She could have lunch whenever she wanted, and her life was very easy. Until one day she came to me and she said, the body corporate has a problem, and they've told me I have to stop seeing patients at home. What do I do? And we sat and discussed it, and she had to get an office. And the question was, do I take an office in an office building, like many other doctors do, or do I move into a different kind of environment? Now, because my business had been shopping centres and retail and consumer behaviour and research and everything that goes with it, I had an understanding of the way consumers function, although I didn't know what it was really that Maureen did. She used to walk around with a needle and with things, and people used to walk out and say, thank you, Maureen, you changed my life. And I used to say, well, that's very nice, let me get back to the shopping centre. So I really didn't understand too much of what it was she was doing. And so we found her a little set of offices which were about as big as the studio in Rivonia, which was a sublet off a day spa. And it had its own little entrance, and I helped Maureen with the partition, and a friend of mine who did air conditioning and whatever, and she set it up, and I carried on doing my thing. It opened on the 7th of the 7th, 2005, which was the day of the London bombings.
Oh, yes.
And Maureen's son lived in London, and so the day that she opened her first office, we were greeted with the London bombing, so she was in quite a state that morning trying to get hold of her son and make sure he was okay. And during the day I came in and she looked at me and she said, this isn't going to work. We're working out of a shoebox here. And I have no room to grow. I can't get bigger left or right. This is only a temporary solution. We've got to come up with something better. And so one of the things that when I was doing research on shopping centres was understanding what we call the density of income, and where are the areas where money is and where money can be spent. And in terms of Johannesburg, whilst a lot of people may say, well, the money's in Hyde Park or in Bryanston or in Khyber Rock, the reality is that the properties are so big that that amount of money that is being earned in that household is represented over 1 or 2 acres. But in terms of density of earning people who are living on much smaller properties, and therefore there's a greater amount of money in the area, Parkhurst is one of the highest areas in Johannesburg, because everyone's living on a 16th or an 1/8 of an acre. They've got houses that have been redeveloped. They're young, they're yuppies, they're getting somewhere in business. It's a very particular profile. So I said, let's go and look around in Parkhurst. And on that Sunday, we drove and we found an old bedorned house. Really, it was in a state. And we said, okay, let's put a pitch, and we put in a number, and we got a phone call the next day. They said, you're on. So now we own this old broken house in Parkhurst. And I spent the next year, with my background, redeveloping the property. We knocked most of it down, we rebuilt it, and approximately 1 year later, that was going to be where Maureen would move to, from where she used to be to where she was now going to go. But some of her patients in Rivonia said, we don't want to travel to Parkhurst. That's much too far for us. Can't you just open in Parkhurst, but please stay in Rivonia as well? So Maureen said, well, I guess I could do that. I'll work in the mornings in Rivonia and in the afternoons in Parkhurst, and I'll have 2 locations because my patients want that. And as we were opening her new branch, we heard of a practice that was for sale in Fourways. A doctor who was going through a divorce wanted to sell his practice, and he'd also started on aesthetics. We met with him just to see what it was about, and we landed up doing a deal. And now there were 3. And Maureen was running in the morning here, in the afternoon there, the next morning there, the next afternoon there. And she was spinning her wheels in all kinds of directions. There was still not a concept behind the business. There was no brand. There was no systems. There were no computers. The accounting system was a big cardboard box into which all the papers got thrown. And on the 24th of the month, you took it to the accountant, and the next morning he told you what your VAT payment was. And it was insanity. And Maureen was getting more and more frazzled. And she said to me, listen, you've been frustrated in the shopping centre industry for a long time. And I was, because every shopping centre was the same. It was a cookie cutout thing. And every 6 months I'd have to go and do another deal with Pick and Pay or with Woolworths or with ShopRite. The only decisions were whether the tiles on the floor were white with a black trim or black with a white trim. But otherwise, it was just cookie cutout stuff. And there were really no challenges left. It was simply a process of making money. And I wasn't having fun anymore. Maureen knew that and said, why don't you take on a challenge? She said, come and work for me. I said, no, I'm not going to work for you. We're going to work together. Let's do something together. I said, but you have your strengths and I have my strengths. We're both A-type personalities. We both have very strong opinions. We both have strengths and we both have weaknesses. And one of the keys to our success is we decided very early on that neither one of us ever needs to be right and the other person needs to be wrong. Because generally the answer will lie out of the fact that we come at life very differently. And because we have a different perspective and we respect each other's perspectives, at worst we're going to learn something from each other's perspectives, which is a view we don't have ourselves. And by working together and coming at life so differently. So Maureen takes care of the patients, the doctors, the training, anything that's of a medical nature, and I take care of the marketing, the finance, and those areas. That's not to say we work exclusive of each other, because we live together, we exist together, so we're always sharing what is there. So it wasn't really a case of to me, it was just a challenge. I thought, this is great. We'd moved in together by that stage, and so I didn't have the costs of upkeep. I didn't have a family. I didn't have kids to put through schooling or university anymore. I'd settled my divorce by way of a one-off settlement, and my wife and family had relocated to Australia. I wanted to be in South Africa. I didn't want to go to Australia. And we started.
Chris and Suzanne Styles on Mix 93.8.
Wow. I loved what Victor had to say there. And the bit that I loved the most was neither of them had to be right or wrong about something. No ego, which meant, as you said, you could learn from each other. That was brilliant.
Well, it really was, and I think therein lies a real pearl of wisdom, especially for people that are working together, couples in business. Because when ego gets in the way, goodness me, it really does spell huge problems. And I'm so glad that you raised that in the way that you did raise it, because obviously that has been pivotal to the success that the two of you have enjoyed as a couple. Now, what really intrigued me, and I really love the way you spoke about the fact that your business was just growing. In fact, it was a bit like an avalanche. And it's not as if there was any massive strategic plan or whatever, or any major overarching view. It was just happening. And I think that's one of the things that a lot of entrepreneurs become so bowled over by, is the how. And in your case, the how was actually just happening. And as you said, you were running a business out of a box. And I love that. I absolutely love that, because so many of the young entrepreneurs that we deal with, that I take today, being at the Hookup Dinner and the Thud Festival and Global Entrepreneur Week up at Constitution Hill, they are so fraught, if I can, around the plan that they're actually not doing anything. Now, you were doing stuff, and the plan then had to take shape around that. So I'm really curious to understand, and I'm sure our listeners will be as well, in terms of how did you then move? Because goodness me, you now run a big business at 17 outlets around the country. How did you move from what almost seems to be this orderly chaos and business in a box to something that had processes, systems, and procedures? Because obviously you had to do that. So how did you do this?
Okay, so it wasn't quite a box. It was a portable filing cabinet.
Love it.
A big box.
Which clearly went into a big box, but it was a portable filing cabinet, which eventually got too small, and it had to go. I eventually bought myself a big filing cabinet. But then I realized, and Victor said to me, that I have to capture all my clients, on a system. So we got the computer, but at that stage, there weren't many systems around, so we had to get a SPA system where we could capture the patients and then get a history. You can't really write the history of the patient on this on the system. We're still working on that, but we slowly had to capture. So I had someone sitting there capturing all these patients and put them on our little laptop computer, and as the business slowly grew and we got more and more therapists, we realized that we had to write protocols for these therapists, that each one had to do the same, that each one, they would have the individual, treatments, but they had to basically be the same. Like same as you go to McDonald's where you get the few sesame seeds on top. It has to be the same. Otherwise, when patients go from branch to branch, then they start complaining that the treatment's not the same. So slowly we had to develop protocols for all our treatments. I had to develop protocols for all the doctors. So when a doctor arrives, he has to first go through a lot of training using all these protocols. He has to learn all the equipment. He has to learn all the different peels. I mean, we have like 50, 60 different treatments that you can put together. And the way non-invasive treatments work is that you have to combine as many treatments as possible to get the best results. You can't just do one treatment. You can do one treatment, but then you have downtime. And a lot of our patients don't want downtime. So there are a lot of protocols that that the doctors have to work with. The therapists have to work with protocols. The managers have to work with protocols. From the time when the patient walks into the door, what does the manager do? So it's all written in the protocol. And if you don't know, go back to the protocol and have a look. And then obviously you've got an incident protocol, because if there are any incidents in the branch, it has to be reported. And it has to become to the attention of us, and then so that it never ever happens again, and that we all learn from that experience. Things can happen. We see many patients, different patients. They're different certain conditions that you can't do a pill, and then unfortunately the pill gets done, and then we all learn from that experience to make sure it never happens again.
Because when you're doing something, even though it's non-invasive, it is actually a medical procedure of sorts. So, you've got the same duties and responsibilities almost as any clinic, any hospital, even though you're not actually doing surgery. And I think that's something that for me, just listening to you really resonates so nicely, because you read some horror stories on the internet, and the press will never publish a good story, so they'll always tell the horror story of somebody having too much this, doing too much that, or getting treated when they shouldn't. So the way that you actually speak is, this is a serious business with 17 branches. This is not just some backroom little organisation. You really look at it in terms of that.
And the people who come to us care what they what they look like. So, you can't really do damage to them. They're coming to you to fix them up, not to, make them worse. So it's very important that all the contraindications are excluded before you do any treatment.
I love that, and it shows a lot of care. And I think that's so important, because when you have a consistent brand experience, you know what you're going to get. There's nothing, I think, worse in a consumer's mind than a vacillating brand where you're not sure from one moment to the next what the experience is. And one moment it's euphoric and the next moment it's absolutely horrid. And again, there's a real pearl of wisdom from you in terms of other business owners around the fact that consistency is key, especially when you move beyond one outlet. Now, what also struck me, and I've highlighted it here in the brief that we received around yourselves and your business, was your decision to only hire the best therapists, which immediately speaks to how seriously you take your brand, how seriously you take your standards. But what intrigues me is, how did you get to find the best therapists? Because hiring can be a very, very, very interesting experience. And, as they say, you're busy sifting the wheat from the chaff. So what did you do in order to attract or find or sift the best therapists so that your experience, your brand experience, remained consistent? Victor?
Yeah. After we had gone through the initial, let's call it a year to 18 months of organised chaos, and chaos was the correct word, organised was probably not the correct word. It was chaotic chaos. We really were living day to day and going from crisis to crisis. The field of medical aesthetics is one of the fastest technologically moving fields in business. It has moved as rapidly as digital telephones, as cell phone technology, and the price that you pay for technology is continuously coming down, but also immediately evolving into next generation, and next generation. So we knew that we needed to get on top of a whole bunch of things. And instead of just waking up every day and saying, what are we going to do today, that we needed some form of plan. Our plan at that stage was not to grow the business, but we did recognize that we needed to manage the business, and we needed to establish a whole bunch of ground rules. One of the first, just by way of background, I had, after becoming an architect, I spent a number of more years at university doing postgrad work, and I've all my life been a voracious reader. I started reading business books. With the very first business book I ever read was In Search of Excellence by Tom Peters, which was back in the 1970s. It was one of the first acknowledged business books outside of Dale Carnegie and Napoleon Hill, and I've read literally hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of business books. One of the books that had always stuck with me was a book called Maverick by Ricardo Semler, who approached business in a very different way, despite the fact that he had a Harvard MBA. And there were lots of things that he had said in his book that always resonated with me. But because I worked in the construction and property industry, I really was a victim of an industry and a way that things were being done by the vast majority of people. But here we were in a complete new field, because prior to medical aesthetics, a woman could go to a beautician and get a facial, or to a plastic surgeon and get a facelift, and there was absolutely nothing in between. This was a new field. It was a pioneering field. We were going where no one had gone before. As Maureen said, she bought the filler and they said, here's a video, teach yourself, off you go. there was no proper instruction. There was nothing.
Which is actually quite scary if you think about it.
Very
really.
scary, very scary. And, it felt like the Wild West because we couldn't look at anyone else's recipe and say, oh, that worked, let's replicate it. We had to make it up ourselves. One of the first things we had to do is, and it's a saying that I use in a lot of business, is in business, treat yourself as an employee and treat your employees as yourself. And what goes behind that is, firstly, the fact that you are an investor and shareholder in a business is a completely separate thing to working in the business. And whatever you're doing, always understand which role you are playing. If you're an investor, what is it you're looking for? Are you looking to get dividends? Are you looking to grow the business? Are you looking to reinvest in the business? Are you playing a 20-year game? Or do you want to make quick, short-term money, sell in, sell out? That's your role as a shareholder and as an investor. And once you've made that decision, stick with that decision, because based on what the requirements are of the shareholders, the people who manage the business will then manage that accordingly. When you're talking to your staff, talk to them as the managing director of the business, not the owner of the business, not the shareholder in the business. Likewise, treating your staff as yourself, don't apply double standards where you're entitled to one thing. And Ricardo Semler had a great thing that nobody in their company had an allocated parking bay. The person who arrived at work first parked closest to the door, and the person who arrived at work last parked furthest from the door. And the managing director did not have an automatic right to the bay next to the door because it had his name on it. And so working in a kind of democratic system that empowers people where they're allowed to use their initiative. So we established that principle firstly, and we separated the principles of working in the business. And when you work in the business, by the way, pay yourself a salary for the work that you do.
For sure.
That does not have to do with taking the profits or the investment or dividends or whatever. Pay yourself a market-related salary for the work you actually put in. And if you're not there all day, don't pay yourself as though you were there all day. But if you are there all day, pay yourself the right wage.
Well, I have to say I really like that, because what happens so often with entrepreneurs in a business is they don't pay themselves at all. And then resentment's got to kick in at some stage, because you are shouldering all the responsibility, a lot of the times doing a huge amount of work.
Yeah.
And you're not getting paid at all. And I think it's Dr. DeMartini who says, pay yourself first.
Yes.
Because if you're happy to pay everybody else as well.
Correct.
And keep it good.
Well, I do love that, and goodness me, Victor, that was some brilliant business nous that you shared with us there, and I just want to recap on it. It's so important what you just said there. Know who you are, what you're doing, and why you're doing it. I loved that. The fact that the fast-moving business needed to be managed, and it was almost as if you just needed to slow everything down, establish the ground rules, etc., etc. Fabulous. And this is it, because a lot of people out there desire explosive growth in their business, but when it happens, they have absolutely no idea. As we say, thoughts become things. So you desire that, you're going to get it, and then it's like, oh my word, I wish I hadn't had this. So it's really precious that you're sharing this information tonight, because what I can gather is that amidst all the chaos, and there you go, I dropped the word organized, what you are doing is you are keeping a calm mind, and you are looking to bring order into the chaos in a logical and sensible way that didn't impinge upon the business.
Correct, and really one step at a time. But that the very first step was this case of separating the fact you work in the business and you're investing in the business. Get that rule done.
I love it.
The second thing that we needed to establish is, why are we in business? Okay? And the obvious answer that most people will throw at you is to make money. Nonsense. That's not why you're in business. Okay? We had to spend a lot of time in asking ourselves why we were in business. We could do anything. We had different backgrounds. We could make reasonable livings. We could work in corporate. We could have started in interior design. By the way, Maureen's also published Interior Designer. And so with my architecture, we have another thing that we could be doing, buying old houses and renovating them or whatever. Why were we in this business? And what we got to was that essentially we wanted to make a difference in people's lives. And we wanted to facilitate their transformation, because we recognized, and not by way of being very judgmental, but people are aware of the way they look, and they are aware of what other people think about how they look. And if they can improve the way they feel about themselves, their self-confidence gets up, and we can make that difference.
Chris and Suzanne Styles on Mix 93.8.
Just before the break, I loved what you said, Victor, around the impact that your work is having on people and the fact that it's making them feel better about themselves. And that is already just a huge thing, because when we feel better about ourselves, we're already in a far more abundant state, mentally, vibrationally, and all those good metaphysical things. The thing that interests me, and I go back to one of my favorite books. It's a book called Psycho-Cybernetics by Dr. Maxwell Maltz. And in the first couple of pages, he just writes about how incredibly important your self-image is and your self-concept. And he speaks about people that underwent transformation and what a phenomenal change it had on their lives, because just when they looked in the mirror, they saw something that was so much better, if I can put it that way, than what they originally were. Is this something that you find in your business as well? When you, Maureen, and I'm directing the question to you, when you help women or when you help people look younger, you give them more of a joie de vivre, if you could call it that, do you actually see a transformation in them also in terms of their self-concept and sense of self?
Absolutely. They start dressing better. They appear to be able to get better jobs. A lot of them come to us because they don't feel they look right for a certain job. A lot of the patients are older and they're competing with very young workers, so they have to look younger in their job. And the transformation's not only on our patients, the transformation's also on our staff, and that's where Victor comes in. He does a lot of transformational work on the staff to improve their perception of themselves. And yes, so
wow.
Victor can. He's really into that, Victor, transforming the staff.
I love that. I mean, that's what the show's all about. That's why we were thrilled to have you onto the Success Show tonight, because what we do through the show is drive transformation, whether it be in the mind, body, spirit, whatever it might be. And I guess the question that I'd like to put to you, Victor, right now is, given the fact that you were looking to hire the best staff, now the best staff can also come with their own challenges, because in order to be the best, they want to constantly grow. And that brings with it its own set of challenges, because, I think I'm absolutely fabulous and now I'm not being grown. How did you and Maureen deal with the personal growth element of the people working within your business?
Okay, the first thing in attracting those staff or in getting those staff, we made it actually quite simple. We didn't have to go out and look for them. We let them look for us. It sounds like an easy solution. We have around 200 staff members at the moment. There's not a single person that has ever answered a job ad. There's not a single person that's come through a recruiter. Every single one of those two people knocked on our door and said, I like what you're doing. I've heard about what you're doing. I want to be a part of this. So that for us is the first step in getting good staff, because it's those people that have the initiative, that are firstly aware of this business, this marketplace, have been able to identify us and what we do, and have the confidence to knock on the door and say, I want to be part of this. So you've already created a massive weeding out process in terms of mediocrity.
I've got to ask you there, was this a decision, because of course we love hearing stories about attraction, and this is what we teach young people, in fact business people, every day, is around make a decision about what you want and get it out there. You decide, I desire this. I am employing only the best people.
We do that all the time.
Love it. Absolutely love it.
I come from a very metaphysical, esoteric background. Maureen comes from a far more traditional, orthodox kind of background. So once again, we're diametrically opposed. And somewhere by combining those two approaches, we find something that works.
Well, I love that, diametrically opposed yet powerfully congruent.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Maureen, as you have looked at the development of your baby, if I may term it as such, to what is now a really serious business. And for all of our listeners, I would encourage you to go to skinrenewal.co.za. This is an absolutely fascinating story that these two people are sharing with us tonight about their business, the history of their business, the growth of their business. And on skinrenewal.co.za, you can actually learn more about what they actually do for you. So go and give your nose a treat on the website. But to come back to this, are you actually astonished at where your business is today? Or did you actually feel and believe, even when it was just a small business, and I say that with respect, but this embryonic business, if you will, did you have the vision that it would get to this size?
I had the vision, and Victor helped me make it happen. I've always had this vision of having all these clinics, but I needed someone to help me. You can't be a master of everything. So I have to be a master in the medical side, in the integrative health side, and Victor's the one that helps me make it happen.
I just love what you've said there, and for those of you who can't see us in studio, because this is obviously radio, which is theatre of the mind, as she said that, I literally gave one of those fist pumps as if I'd sunk about a 50-foot putt to win the Masters at Augusta. But the reason is because over and over and over again we teach, and that's exactly what we were teaching today at the Hookup Dinner Festival, was as long as you know what your end picture looks like, you will attract the way. The right people, the right opportunities, the right technologies, everything will be brought in. And so often we become so fraught around the how that we actually forget about the end picture. And what you've just said there was worth gold, because that's it. You had the vision. You saw all the clinics. And there it has happened for you. And the thing is, you know, from what I can understand, you're an absolute specialist at what you do, and now you have someone who's very competently and capably helping you run and grow and manage the business. There it is. It's beautiful.
I'm pleased too.
You know, Maureen is impulsive, quick, will make a R1 million decision in 30 seconds. I am slow and ponderous and analytical. I suffer from paralysis by analysis. So Maureen kicks my butt and gets me moving, and I slow her down to be a little more cautious. And somewhere between the way is the right way. You asked the question on why do we... One of the main reasons we grew this business was not because we wanted to reach more people or be more successful or anything. Because we started treating our own staff like ourselves and like our family, and we really do. When you get to understand some of the ways we actually work with our staff in terms of how we deal with issues like, because we're employing girls that are between the age of 20 and 30, we're going to have lots of them falling in love and out of love and in love and out of love and getting married and getting engaged and engagements that break off and children and babies. And instead of, you know, I was very worried that one day a staff member would come to me and say, Vic, I've got some bad news, I'm pregnant. I never wanted that to happen, because this should be wonderful news. And yet in many organizations, a woman who's fallen pregnant believes that the company sees that as bad news. So we had to change the narrative completely and let it be something different. Because of the way we treat our staff, we tend to keep our staff. But because we keep our staff, there isn't a massive turnover. And for people to grow, the only way we can grow is to grow the business. So the business has grown to create the opportunities for the people within it to do more things and different things. We've got therapists who've got law degrees, BCom marketing degrees, studying psychology. So all sorts of subjects. And we have people who started off as therapists who are now working in finance, move out of finance, go into marketing for a year. We don't believe in job titles. We don't believe in job descriptions. It's very simple. What do we do? Make a difference in people's lives. How do we do it? We do whatever it takes. End of story. That's the job description, and that's the job title.
I really love that, because I actually for a long time thought I was completely barking mad. I used to run an advertising media business. I only employed women, female breadwinners, because I knew that they understood responsibility, and you didn't have to clock watch them, because they'd clock watch themselves and do whatever it took to earn the money, keep their kids happy, their families happy. And it was a lovely system, because although we had titles on the company documentation, if somebody was busy doing a proposal and I was making coffee, then I would make coffee for everybody. And it was a very similar kind of thing and understanding, because it's the only way that you can grow people is to let them try out and do other things. And it really touches quite a nerve with me when I hear you say, you never wanted to hear any of your ladies come up and say, I've got bad news for you. Because as a young lady, as a recent divorcee, I found out that I was pregnant in my 20s, and I got fired because it was a skandal, and found myself with 2 children, pregnant with a 3rd, and without a job, which,
Sure.
And that was in the 90s, so you weren't going to get another job. And the things that I had to do to keep myself going, and waitressing and running the floor in restaurants, which I'm eternally grateful for. But the point was, is I should never have been placed in that decision. And it's a wonderful thing, because as Richard Branson says, as Ricardo says, if you look after your staff, your customers are not the most important. It's the people that work in your business and represent you, because if they are happy, your customers are delirious and they'll pay.
Yeah. Well, I do love tonight's interview. I think it's just fantastic. And to have 2 people like yourselves sharing your success, and in such a simple way. There's a lot of love in your business. You treat your business with family values. And there is an enormous message in that, and the message in it, and it's something that I have felt very strongly about for a long time, is when something happens in business and someone screws someone else over, and then they turn and they say, it's business, don't take it personally. I just don't think they get it. They don't understand the first thing about life or business. Because by telling me not to take it personally, firstly, I am going to do it. I'm going to take it very personally. And I'm probably going to hate your guts for the rest of your life, which is an absolutely shocking energy field to have with that person. And
possibly screw the person back.
Yes, exactly.
And perpetuate.
Well, this is it, and that's why it's just so refreshing to have 2 very successful people in business just telling it from a completely different perspective. And in that regard, I absolutely celebrate and honor and respect your success. Okay. And as we're moving up to the top of the hour now, I'd like to ask both of you in your own individual capacities. Maureen, as you look back, you have a beautiful business now. It's grown. It really is the talk of the town. I mean, one can wax lyrical about it, but I think to say it's a beautiful business is really enough. And what has been your greatest lesson on this journey in terms of your business? Your single greatest lesson. What jumps to mind?
That you can't do it all on, you can't do it all on your own. You have your limitations, and as a doctor, we're not taught, I don't have much business acumen, but I've slowly acquired it over the years through Victor. And, surround yourself with people who are more intelligent than yourselves, if you can, to help you along your path.
Well, I do love that. Scott Harris from Australia always says, you want to be mixing and socializing with people where you're the dumbest and the poorest person in the room. And Victor, your greatest lesson over the last while?
As usually happens with me, a little bit, it happens in a story form. And I know we're short of time, but it was the creation of our protocols. It's very easy for a company, and for let's call it the Brains Trust, to sit down and develop a protocol and say, right, here are the rules, and come down like Moses from the mountain and say, these are the rules, here you all have to do it. We didn't do that. What we made is we created an inclusive process, and the rules were made by everybody. All 200 people contributed and continue to contribute, and now it's their rules. It's their collective wisdom. It's the repository of all their knowledge that has been placed together, and nobody's counting whether they were 1% or 10% responsible.
Chris and Suzanne Styles on Mix 93.8.
Well, what a marvelous hour it has been chatting to these 2 phenomenal people, Dr. Maureen Allem and Victor Snyders of skinrenewal.co.za. Thank you so much for joining us in studio and sharing your story, and what a powerful story it is, and great, profound pearls of wisdom tonight. Thank you so much.
Oh, pleasure, Chris. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks, Suzanne.
Thanks, Suzanne.
It's been lovely to have you, and I just want to go back to those rules just before we finish off. just what a lesson for you when you are starting out your business and you're looking at the growth, because if you're going to have a successful business, you are going to have employees. So, in fact, two great pearls of wisdom there that I really enjoyed. First of all, decide what kind of employees you want, and they will definitely be the great ones. And attract them, get that message out there, and just boom it out that that is what you want. And secondly, when it comes to setting rules, let the people you employ have something to say, because when it becomes their rules, they're far more likely to embrace them than if you set those rules with cast iron rod.
Absolutely. Now, one of my most favorite books is You Were Born Rich by Bob Proctor, and that book is available as a free download off the queenparticle.com, which is the website that Suzanne has put together for female breadwinners. And in that, there's actually a chapter in the book which is titled Let Go and Let God. And what Bob is actually teaching there is actually about having faith in the forces of the universe, and actually just allowing it to happen. In other words, getting out of your own way. And in that chapter, he teaches about how force negates. So when you're forcing something, all you're basically doing is really sending it up the creek without a paddle. And what for me is so phenomenal about tonight's interview, it epitomizes in its own very unique and quirky way how a beautiful business was created without having to necessarily use force. In actual fact, it was everything but force. The therapists arrived. Now, this is not just some arbitrary story. This is an actual case study, a success story of how powerful it is in terms of what it is that you will attract. And therefore, it's not that you will attract what you want, it is you will attract what you are. And these two people have put together a really beautiful business, and that energy therefore attracted the right people. And just think of that in terms of how effortless it is, as opposed to the heartache and the headache and the frustration that goes with hardcore forced recruiting, if I can put it as that. So I have learned a great deal from them tonight, and it has just been a great blessing to interview them.
But if you'd like to catch the podcast, it'll be up on Thursday on the successshow.podbean.com. And I think it's well worth listening. And if you're listening to us for the first time tonight on DSTV 923, welcome. It's been our absolute pleasure. You've been listening to Chris and Suzanne Styles on the Success Show on Mix 93.8 FM.
Chris and Suzanne Styles on Mix 93.8.